good.
Well,
6
I
a.m.
understand it's
here.
getting dark there.
Yeah, it's a wrap, and if you look a little bit carefully, you can just see behind me some set of boxes being wrapped up by the host country and the organizers here at the venue, what they call the Busan Exhibition Center. So you can hear some noise at the background. This is the final night. We've had the final event, and everyone is packed up and ready to go home.
Sure. So how successful would you say this year's annual general meeting of the AfDB was?
Well, it's been a great success if you look at the coverage that it has received. 350 million people worldwide watched this event on Twitter, on radio, read the newspapers and what have you, and that was the final press briefing by the AfDB president about a few hours ago, about lunchtime here, trying to prepare the final hours of this one-week program. And of course, it's been really big if you look at the topics that's been discussed. You find a number of issues around infrastructure and industrialization. And in your introduction, you just alluded to some of the things that were discussed here, how Africa needs to ramp up on infrastructure, digitalization, what needs to be done. But more specific is the fact that not just because this event is held in South Korea, but of course we've got delegates from China, from Japan and other parts of Asia who are looking at that partnership from Asia-Pacific region with Africa. So this is not just about South Korea, but about the entire Asia. And if you look very closely, you find that the relationship between a number of African sovereigns is expanding with China rather than Europe and America, which are the traditional partners for many African states. And that is something that is very significant with this event.
Now, Nigeria signed a disaster funding deal at this meeting with Africa Risk Capacity. How important was this deal for Nigeria?
Well, this is important, and this is a new deal. It just set up by 2014, about $36 million so far disbursed to about 4 African countries: Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, and one other African country within the Western Sahara. The key issue for Nigeria here, Nigeria was a founding partner of the Africa Risk Capacity Limited, but for Nigeria to apply to be a member or to apply to the fund, which is the insurance fund, is very significant, because you can see how the impact of disaster, natural disasters, is beginning to creep in from Nigeria's north, now heading towards the central part of the country. You can see how the effect of insecurity is affecting food production and food supply. So Nigeria needs to draw on this. Nigeria actually qualifies. If you look at what Nigeria's Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, has been doing, we have what it takes in terms of preparedness, and that is what qualifies Nigeria for this relationship. So this cooperation is getting started, and Nigeria will be able to draw that at any point in time when the country needs it. The good thing about this particular, the Africa Risk Capacity Fund, is the fact that, yes, the money can be within the country requesting for it within 24 hours, and the people that really needs it on the continent, people who are exposed, can get it within 120 hours.
So where is the funding coming from? How does it work?
Well, it's an insurance fund put together. It was actually the initiative of the African Union, but AfDB, as you know, is backing this up. So the fund is actually coming from AfDB, of course, to all the countries which are member states of the AfDB.
Okay. So Nigerian Diaspora Bond clinched an award in the debt market category of the 2018 African Bankers Award. That was held on the sideline of this meeting. What made Nigeria Diaspora Bond stand out?
Yeah, it was called the Deal of the Year, and you know, in about 2 weeks or about a week from now, this bond, the Diaspora Bond, $300 million, will get another award in London, which the Debt Management Office, which is the midwife of this Nigerian sovereign bond, would collect. And everyone everywhere is talking about why this bond is very unique to tap into that about $20 billion that Nigeria has as remittances from its citizens overseas who are bringing money home. $300 million looks like a big amount, but if you look at the size of $20 billion every year, that's a drop in the ocean. So if you ask me, Nigeria can do a lot more to leverage what Nigerians have overseas that can be used to build infrastructure, to bring in, to support the social investment in healthcare, in education, and other things that the country sorely need at this particular time.
Now, I know at this meeting a lot of deals were signed. So tell us about the $5 billion deal on financial cooperation signed by the South Korean government and the African Development Bank.
Africa needs every friend and every money it can get at this point in time. Yes, $5 billion. This money will move into critical infrastructure. Don't forget, now Africa is learning and having this very warm handshake with South Korea, learning from their first, second, third, and now the fourth industrial revolution. If you're looking at those you can leverage on, you're talking about South Korea. This is a country very small in population, very small in terms of land mass. They have no land mass, they have no crude oil, they don't have diamonds, they don't have, at least hasn't been discovered yet. If they have, they don't have gas. So this is a country that grows organically from what it has. So Africa has far much more in terms of natural resources. So the AfDB president says today that, look, we have much more natural resources, but we need to start doing manufacturing, industrialization, small, light manufacturing to heavy equipment, including aircraft or railways, whatever it is, to lift ourselves out of poverty, not to lose out on the fourth industrial revolution. So Nigeria is signing, Africa is signing up, not just to South Korea, but earlier today we also heard from the Japanese and the Chinese that they're ready to cooperate with the AfDB as it continues to move those high five pillars across Africa: agriculture, industries, social investment, and the rest of them.
Countries who may probably want to access these funds, how does it work? How would they go about it? Who is in possession of these funds?
Well, you have the Korea-Africa Economic Cooperation, which is the COFEC in place, which is a program between South Korea or Korea and Africa. Of course, AfDB is sitting on top of that. Of course, because again, Nigeria and other countries in Africa are members of the AfDB. This is something that the Board of Governors, the shareholders of the AfDB will discuss together with their partners here in South Korea, and they'll be able to decide who qualifies for it, how does it go out. This is an MOU. This will be explained further. The cooperation has been signed. Now, this money will come from the South Korea side. What does it require on the side of the African government and states and private sector that will be dealt with? As you know, AfDB works with governments more from the private sector side rather than the government directly. It's not the World Bank, it's not the IMF. So it works more with the private sector. That is where the money will go, but they have to be decided how this money will be increased. But if you look at what South Korea is already doing on the African continent, we were in Ivory Coast about a few weeks ago, and we went to a few towns and villages around Yamoussoukro region, the central part of the Côte d'Ivoire. And right there, we saw a bit of what the South Koreans are already invested in, and not just in Ivory Coast, in a few other African countries as well. So this $5 billion will raise the level of funding that's been supported, including technical expertise, don't forget, including technical expertise and training and capacity building for Africans that need to learn from South Korea how the industrialization actually went.
Now, one of the sessions at this meeting dealt with African youth solving continental challenges. What were the discussions around this? What did the participants say?
Well, very important. You're talking about the digital economy moving forward. You have the young generation that will drive blockchain technology, for example, to block corruption in government contracts and what have you. You're talking about M-Pesa and the rest of them. These are the youths of Africa, entrepreneurs who are raising the game. The old generation, I think that's where I belong. I'm not too sure, but I just need to check. But seriously speaking, in terms of science, engineering, mathematics, technology, and what have you, smartphones, smart ideas, you're talking about youths in Africa who will be able to sit on top of this. So bringing the youths together, and I've seen this with the AfDB over the last few years, they're bringing the youths more into the equation rather than the old folks. Now, we still need the older generations, those who are in the political governance, fiscal policy, decision-making at the level of governance across the continent, but they need to give way to the young ones who will drive the fourth industrial revolution. And that's the message here. They need to make policies. They need to provide the environment that will make the youth entrepreneurship to thrive and allow these new investments coming from other parts of the world to function and work well for Africa, because this is a huge population. We're talking about millions and millions of young people across the continent who are designing very small little things, and that will provide the much needed help for Africa to leverage industrialization, at the fourth level, not the old railways, the old locomotives of the 19th century.
So what are the other major highlights and discussions at this meeting?
Well, there are a lot of discussions also around what Africa needs to do about technology transfer, about innovation, and how to imitate what it already knows. But a lot of these discussions also go around why Africa needs to get its acts together. Like the African Development Bank president puts it, we cannot just be throwing money around and hoping that it sticks and hope that it will succeed. We need to be specific, we need to be consistent about how we spend money on infrastructure. Africa has thrown so much money around, including its own money, and those it has received from the World Bank, IMF, and other agencies over the decades, and has resulted almost in nothing. Right now, Africa is deindustrializing. So there's a need to reverse the deindustrialization of the continent and move it forward. And that means that we need to do things differently. We need to be consistent. We need to be very, very patient, but we also need to be deliberate. And that is the key word here, to be deliberate in how we spend money and what we spend that money on. So we need to decide what policies, what infrastructure we're building, what industries we're moving into. Just having the normal budget process and just hoping that we allocate money, and if we just spend it that way, it will work. It does not work that way. We've seen experiences from Japan today, and talking about China, for example, in Beijing, there were less than 5-10 cars in the city of Beijing 20, 30 years ago. Today, the whole place is buzzing. And this is South Korea. This is Busan, for example. This is not even the political or the financial capital of South Korea, for example. This is just a port city. And this is described as the most beautiful city and the most functional city in South Korea, and not even the Seoul, the country's political capital. And that tells you that we need to move out from the old way of thinking that we will develop a country's political capital, and that's where everybody will migrate. We need to spread out. We need to build new seaports. We need to build new rail lines. We need to build new economic regions in each country across Africa. And that is what will help, rather than the current arrangement in which we just think if we build a few railway lines, if we build a few airports around, they will all come together somehow with good luck, and perhaps we will make it. That is no longer going to work.
Well, Bosun, a lot of questions have been coming in. Why is African Development Bank holding its meeting in South Korea? So what is the lesson there for African leaders to learn?
Well, if you remember, the way African Development Bank is not owned by just Africa alone. The United States has about 6%. It's a share or equity share of AfDB. Nigeria is the largest shareholder of the African Development Bank. We own 10. Nigeria owns a 10% share, followed by United States and a few other countries around the world, and that includes a few countries in Asia. So AfDB has the name African Development Bank, but it is owned globally. If you remember, as we speak now, a Nigeria former finance minister is on the Asian Development Bank board of governors. So this is an international institution, that's AfDB. However, if you look at how Busan, this city in particular in South Korea, was developed and what can be learned, you need to be here to see it for yourself. And this is why this was held here, one of the primary reasons, to be more specific. If you look at the number of Africa's former head of states and governors and finance ministers and central bankers who are here, they need to be here. And that's what the AfDB says. They need to come here to see for themselves what can be done and how it can be leveraged very quickly. As the saying goes, seeing is believing. If they see it, then it goes into everybody's head. So when they get back home to the presidential villa, or everyone gets back to offices, they can see, yes,
all right,
we saw it. Yes.
I agree. I agree.
Yes,
Seeing is believing. Thank you very much for your time, Bosun.